Welcome, welcome to another installment of the Goddess Keys, where we activate and remember all of the sacred parts of ourselves, all of the parts of ourselves that we've tucked away, or we've been taught or conditioned to feel ashamed of, or we've been in a sleep state about, like all of aspects of self in this awakening process, in this process of collective expansion that we're in, is going to really have us embrace ourselves, and not just our matrix selves, not just our 3D avatar selves, but our multidimensional selves. And I'm so happy to be a witness on this particular part of your journey for however long our paths may cross for. The funny thing about the internet algorithm, right, is it'll pair us up with folks that we're frequently matched with at a particular time. And sometimes that shifts, right? So if I've caught you on a particular frequency, then we're vibing right now. And I hope that you get something enriching out of this, something that makes you inspired to look at an aspect in your life in more of a multidimensional way. So that's the work I really do to support people and mentor people on this particular path. Okay, so I wanted to get into a topic that's been mulling over in my brain for quite a while. And I just think I've had some of my own realizations and integrations that is going to help land this topic better. And that is this concept around the sacred clown. I want to talk about the sacred clown. And there will become a portion in your awakening path, or maybe this has already happened to you, where the sacred clown is going to appear in your reality somehow. So it is really the merging of the light and the dark. Usually the sacred clown, first of all, this shows up in a lot of indigenous cultures, and shamans were considered to be sacred clowns. Like that was a part of the shamanistic practice, was humor. And how interesting that they would utilize the colors of black and white to integrate that, because I mean that definitely shows polarity. And here's this sacred clown able to transcend polarity and not just wear black and not just wear white, but wear black and white, and is able to create a sacred moment in time where people can like disconnect from the quote unquote seriousness of the false matrix simulation and have an opportunity to laugh. So this is very, very critical to holding the consciousness of the collective, humor, okay? And the way to transcend a lot of what you experience within the false matrix simulation is through humor. It's an alchemical bomb. And so this is why you'll find that comedians, a lot of the great comedians, they also have a legacy of being teachers, of being wise ones, of being folks beyond their years too, because in order to see the immense amount of polarity in our reality, and a lot of times that can show up as not so great things. Sometimes it can show up as really great things, but sometimes it can be the complete opposite. And what a comedian needs to do is alchemize the positive and the negative and find a common ground between the two to connect people. Laughter connects people, okay? And you'll find that in interesting times in society, comedians will be attacked. And I think now, particularly in our hyper social media culture right now, the comedians are kind of under attack, right? Like there's this concept of free speech. You know, how free can you be with your speech? Changing the way that you speak even, right? Like when you're on social media platforms, like now we say unalive, supposedly, right? And so we shift our language to, I guess, have a socially acceptable common ground, but it can take away from that humor aspect as well. And so there's a sacredness to humor. I was just doing a little bit of light research because I noticed that somewhere around the time after COVID, it just seemed as though I started seeing things in the collective consciousness about comedians getting attacked. The two right offhand, I feel like there was another one, but I could only find two. So there was one, of course, we know about the Chris Rock slap, and I forgot what year that was. I believe that was either 2022 or 2023. I forgot when that Chris Rock slap happened. And that was a comedian getting attacked. Usually, it's sacred. The comedian is usually able to speak truth to power and get away with it. That's the magic. That's the alchemy of the comedian. And, even in times of really harsh hierarchies, that comedian, that joker, that sacred clown was able to hold space in certain kinds of ways that most people in the collective weren't able to do. So they were like a master of ceremonies in a lot of ways, and a lot of the rules just didn't apply to them as it relates to power. And so now when you get this energy of sometimes comedians maybe feeling like they could be attacked, like they could be a target for saying something that somebody else disagrees with. This is what happens when we get really focused on polarity, right? You get so entrenched in your worldview and you come across somebody else who's really entrenched in their worldview, and there's no room for flow. It's just all friction and tension. And then it ends up into not a great experience, okay? And then I believe in 2022, Dave Chappelle also got attacked, okay? And so that's another example of a comedian coming under attack. And that was when he was, I think it also has something to do with the attack happening while you're doing your comedian thing. It's not just that they happen to be comedians, but it's they got attacked while doing the role of comedian. You could even say Jamie Foxx too. Jamie Foxx, has been having some really weird health issues, and people kind of say it's a little suspicious. And he's also a comedian. I mean, he's a lot of things. He's an R&B singer, and he kind of runs the gamut. But the way he started off was comedy, okay? And before people knew Jamie Foxx could sing, they knew that Jamie Foxx could make people laugh, okay? So how interesting, right, that, these comedians are coming up within the collective consciousness under fire. So that's one aspect. And then I don't know if y'all have read that comic or watched that series called Watchmen. That graphic novel is really awesome. If you want to learn a little bit more about polarity and they start getting at polarity integration. They just do a lot they play a lot with polarity in that particular comic book series. There is even a quote from that series that I remember, which just says, "Up is down and black is white." And a big piece around that story that I can recall is just the juxtaposition of right versus wrong, black versus white, that sort of thing. Okay, they really play with polarity. And one thing that's interesting about that particular storyline is it starts out with a death of a comedian. Everything goes on and popping as it relates to this story after a comedian dies, okay? And that was kind of what centers around the story. So anyway, all that to say, comedians are not just people who are paid to make us laugh. They are, but they're doing something else. They're working through the collective unconscious. And a lot of times they can heal the collective unconscious. Their powers can be utilized for really great things or really not so great things, So a lot of that is just based upon interpretation. But anyway, you will get to this point where you need to look at things from a place that transcends polarity. And so this sacred clown will show up in your field to basically just get you to question the nature of reality through humor and through laughter. So I've had my own experiences, and it really was a moment of deeper reflection for me when the sacred clown appeared. And what I want to say is that a lot of times this sacred clown is also kind of in the backdrop of the false matrix simulation. So there's just so much games. There's so much around games within the false matrix. And a lot of the games that you'll even see, like a lot of video games, will have really interesting esoteric elements hidden and embedded within them, which is really interesting because, you know, video games provide energy into astral realms and other worlds. Games have a really big impact on the collective unconscious, and a lot of subliminal messages can go through the games, and a lot of energy exchange could happen through the realm of gaming. Okay. And, but it's a really important, it's like considered to be really trivial, but in the background, it's playing a really important programming role. And then there's just a lot around masquerading, and just there's a lot of games that are played within the quote high power elite as well. And they play a lot with black and white as well, and polarity as well. So at some point you will have to look at something that you have seen as being the greatest nuisance to you, the thing that made your life the most miserable, and you'll have to find humor in it at some point. Okay, you'll have to kind of be able to poke fun at it in certain ways and think about the situation in a much lighter way. Okay, if we think about older people who have lived through a lot, who have gone through a lot, sometimes they can have an interesting take on life, and it's their life experience that can make them so funny, right? That can make them so humorous, because they've learned people, they've learned different situations, you know, they've mastered different situations, they've seen a lot, you know, so they've been able to identify and notice more trends and patterns. And then they also kind of have dropped certain parts of the ego through the process of aging as well, and they're more likely to kind of tell things as it is, instead of like doing the whole political correctness. Okay. So there's that aspect. You'll see the sacred clown for that reason, but you're also going to see it because you're going to start really looking at light work and shadow work differently. Like, we're taught to focus on the shadow, but only so much, right? Like, we're supposed to mainly stay positive, and then, you know, maybe we do some shadow work once a month or whatever. But there's some people who thrive off of the transmutation of energy. Okay. And this is getting more into like the darker psychology of things, and this concept of energetic vampirism. Okay. And a lot of times energy vampires have, you know, sometimes, you know, they're really into the occult and all that kind of stuff too. And it's because they might be on assignment to transmute, to support with the transmutation of the collective shadow body. Okay. And, you know, if you're somebody who you feel like you are really magnetic, but you magnetize a lot of like the good things and then a lot of the things that are really traumatic, like this might be a sign of different vampiric qualities to look into, because you might literally be calling in through your energetic field, like all the woundedness of people, to like transmute and alchemize that. And if you do that in a more conscious way, you can transcend being an empath and like falling into the like empath narcissist paradigm. Okay. And instead, you can specifically feed off of all of what is artificial around somebody, whether that's like etheric implants, artificial software. Archons are a big one. So archons are very vampiric and parasitic, and cause a lot of the issues within are just our daily reality. A lot of times, like, they thrive on chaos, they thrive on people not getting along. And so a lot of times, like, we could be acting under archonic interference. Okay. And, people who inspire more fear in you, they inspire more stress from you. Like, it's very likely that they might be doing the whole archonic interference thing. If you're having like people come into your reality, like doing the copycat energy, that sort of stuff, like that's also a part of archonic interference. And if you can start recognizing archonic interference, like they're here until they're not here anymore, so you could literally become that galactic vacuum that like comes in and like brings them, like any archons and that sort of stuff into the 0 point field. And there's, you can do that through the absorption of their energy. And, some of us have some interesting portal capabilities, especially if we have like certain galactic markings. So vampire, if we're looking at it from that perspective, vampire takes on a different connotation. Okay, that's something to look into. And this is where we really start getting into the polarity integration and like getting out of different, like being moral, like morals, like how do we determine what is morality? If there's something that's supporting with the clearing of the collective, okay, the clearing of negative energy from the collective, I think that that's something that can be looked at as a particular role that some people are filling. They might not be light workers, but they might be shadow workers and doing what they can to balance the energies on the earthly plane, which is really cool. So it's something that we want to like maybe not just pigeonhole all vampires as being negative, or they are like, but everybody has a role to play within that. So it's just, you start getting into the balancing of dark and light. And then here's like kind of a controversial topic. And I'm going to be going into it more, I think, in like more like private discussions, but it's something to really explore. And I think it could be helpful for the collective right now to process through. So I go through a lot around learning about the architecture of the false matrix simulation. I really, really want to know the ins and outs of it. And I have a vast curiosity as it relates to it. And, the architects of this simulation, they were very thoughtful and they went into a lot of detail about certain things. And so I do find that in this path to, evolutionary unfoldment, I have found that knowledge is power. And, if you can learn about how your body works, how your energetic field works, how your mind works, you can be in a much better position to be sovereign over your energy field and over your life and over your body. So yeah, that's been a really, really big thing for me. And with that, because there's a proliferation of information in the public about light work, there's really not nearly as much information about shadow work that's out there. And that's something that we are collectively becoming more and more curious about, because there are a lot of shadow workers incarnated on this planet at this time. We talk a lot about the light workers, but there are a lot of shadow workers incarnated on this planet and are doing the work around balancing the energetic scales, okay? And vampirism might be a way of doing that, and doing so in a way that, the more you're able to learn about it, the more you're able to kind of like think about what's ethical and, also transcend and transmute some of the polarity. The way that I've heard it described, which has felt pretty, I've liked what I've heard as it relates to this, is you can energy vampire in a way to where you clear all that is artificial or that's keeping that person from their reaching their authentic self. And like, that's a healing capacity that a lot of people have, not that many people, but there are folks who have that. And, a lot of times, that's actually a big gift, but we've experienced it more as like kind of a curse or more of the negative polarity. And I say all this, I'm kind of building this up because of what else I've been learning about the architecture of the false matrix simulation. So it is built upon like the tree of life. Some would say it's the Kabbalistic tree of life, but I find it's actually a few different kinds of trees of life that are in there. The architects of the false matrix simulation, like they did a lot to model that after that energy. And so, learning about the tree of life from an architectural kind of standpoint is helpful with navigating the false matrix simulation. So I've kind of known that, but a lot of the stuff connected to the tree of life, I know are parts of the psyop, like chakras, for example, are connected to the tree of life. And then there's like different sigils and whatnot, and just like what I've learned about these different seals and sigils, it's just not something that I would really want to give my energy to in that kind of way, unless I was creating my own. I'm really big on like learn how to do your own, right? And infuse your own energetic signature into different things. I'm leading up to say, and maybe some of y'all have like already figured this out, but I think this is going to make something click for certain people who listen to this. If the architects of the false matrix modeled a lot on their tree of life, well, they also have a tree of death. They have the Qlippoth. So a part of the false matrix simulation can also be that tree of death, that Qlippoth. And we can sometimes get placed in some of those realities as like a form of a booby trap. Like if we're starting to expand a lot in consciousness, like we can get caught up in weird Qliphothic realms, which is a part of the false matrix simulation, And so I've never been one for like initiating into the Kabbalah or into the Qlippoth, like never interested me. Just kind of seems like another program, which I didn't, or like a religion or something. And so I really wasn't interested in it, but kind of just learned things, definitely learned about the tree of life part. But I've had intel for quite some time that the tree of life architecture that this simulation is built upon is based upon like faulty mathematics, and we need to be reconnected to another ecosystem. Okay, so that's something that I have. But that being said, I did study a little bit of the tree of life just because I was like studying the chakras, but I have since definitely I believe like chakras to be a form of etheric implants, and you want to retrieve your energy from chakras, and I've shared that in other content. So that's kind of where I sit now. But, as a spiritual seeker, I dabbled in lots of different things, and I definitely learned about the Kabbalah because, that's where they told occult practitioners to start, start with reading the Kabbalah and all that stuff. But realized that it's just just another kind of religion sort of thing. It's like built by the same people, so it has that same vibe to it. But that being said, the architects of the false matrix created the Qlippoth and the Kabbalah, so you might be a part of a Qliphothic realm or in some of that vibe and not even know it, just based upon the way the architecture of the simulation is created. So I started having the realization that there were moments in my reality where I was navigating the Qlippoth without even realizing that I was doing it. It was just happening because it's like a part of the program. And I think, I started getting downloads quite recently about transcending trauma and all that. And, the Qlippoth is like basically built around trauma. It's a plane of suffering that a lot of times, sometimes we're like forced into. And if we're none the wiser, we could just kind of loop within that. And it's like a booby trap towards our evolution. And then we get stuck in the shadow And so I think, that energy around, okay, it's time to transcend the shadow, it really spoke to the Qlippothic program, like ending that, like clearing that from my reality hologram, my hard drive, something that I'm giving my energy to, any agreements I made related to it in the subconscious or ancestrally, clearing that. And, that's been a really big piece, because like one is not better than the other. They're like two sides of the same coin. There's certain imagery that's good to know about as it relates to it, and some of the psychology of how things work. But, a big piece that I'm learning is the integration of the shadow and the light. We're taught a lot to cultivate our light body, but there's also a shadow element. And the reason why we want to learn about the whole Qlippoth thing is because a lot of times, like, soul fragments or parts of our inner children can be in these realms. I've definitely seen this, and I've had to retrieve like many different like versions of like inner children that were in Qlippothic realms. And some of us, I think we just like have soul contracts to participate in that, like whether it's an ancestral thing or it's just like we're just like tracked into doing, this is kind of also where the whole, I suspect anyway, that this has to do with the whole targeted individual thing. Because I've been learning that apparently there's different inversions. There's like a back of the tree of life and the back of the Qlippoth, and they have different energies. And there are certain like other realms connected to that. So it might, I don't want to give my energy away to any deity or being. And so I'm really clear about, I was really clear about clearing any agreements or reading into the energies of the Qlippoth. That's something you can do through my genetic path cutter deck, by the way. And so that's available on Patreon, or you can purchase a download, a one-time download. So yeah, that is actually really helpful if you do find yourself in some weird like hellish realms, and like that's a thing that can happen. And like there's even like a program to like, if people are starting to awaken, to put them in weird inverted realms where it just seems like everything is the reverse. And I know I've talked to some of y'all where this has been your reality, and I've been in this too. And I'm like, oh, dang. So a lot of my work, my spiritual work, has been around getting people out of the Qlippothic realm. And I haven't even like contextualized it in such a way, because I wasn't thinking about the Qlippoth. Like I wasn't interested in it. But, the architects of the false matrix simulation put that programming in there. So it's something that a lot of us experience without knowing the name for it, and we can kind of get stuck there. I'll probably share more. I have so much more to say about it, but that's kind of where I think I'm going to leave it in this go round. But that's another reason why the whole polarity integration thing is really key, because if you don't look, if you're like only focus on the tree of life, like I kind of was, but in you like ignore that tree of death, like, but it's a part of the same architecture of the simulation, you can get caught up in the one that you don't know much about, because you don't even know if you're in it. This is why like you can become like food for parasites a lot of times when you don't cultivate your shadow body too. I'm learning more about the protective nature of the shadow body, and it's not just something that's dirty that needs to be thrown away, that it actually can be utilized as a form of psychic self-defense, spiritual self-defense, just like your light body can too. Or how often are we taught to cultivate our shadow body? We're taught to alchemize it. And I know I've said this too. And, to an extent, yes, like I'm thinking alchemy to me in this state means like composting, which is a form of alchemy, actually. Creating something that was supposed to be waste, okay, that was supposed to not have a purpose, and then redirecting its purpose. Because one thing that you can do as an energy vampire is you can like feed off of the like artificial intelligence. You can feed off of the etheric implants that are like, you can utilize, like, if you're able to detect it within your energy field, you can focus your intention to alchemize it into the energy that you want. And you also help to clear the false self of others. So it's a service that you're doing. It's like a cleaning service in a weird way. One thing that I've been doing is I've been learning more about the nature of the archons. And I've been studying them for a while, and I've been needing to find different tactics related to archonic interference, because it's definitely something that I have known about. Like, it's something we all do. And they're very interesting. They actually are a form of an energy vampire. And they seem like the worst things ever, but they can only feed upon what you haven't healed or integrated. If you've accepted it, if you've embodied or embraced that part of yourself and truly loved and cared for that part of yourself, then they can't touch it. They can only touch the things that you haven't healed, that you haven't integrated. So a lot of times your way out of archonic interference is to transmute whatever wound is coming into your reality, okay, and addressing it and releasing it. So in that way, the archons can provide a healing balm, but we don't see it like that. And it's hard to see it like that because sometimes they're just like messing around with stuff, but they can only feed off of what you haven't healed. So they show you what you still need to heal from. So it's an interesting, weird healing service that they even do. But anyway, they're energy vampires, and they feed off of light. They feed off of brightness. And so like even you utilizing like a dark auric field, and what are we taught usually? If your aura is dark, that means you're evil and all that kind of stuff. But that's just like propaganda from the New Age spiritual community, which has been like rife with, the people who say, we're trying to ascend humanity. They're working with the same people that created the same beings that created some of the issues that we're dealing with today. So yeah, polarity integration, and navigating the Qlippoth. I think people who identify as indigo type 3s, I really want to tie this to the indigo type 3 thing. People who identify as indigo type 3s could be navigating parts of the Qlippoth, or even could be in the space that I've been hearing about where they intentionally invert everything and reverse everything so that nothing like goes right for you. Like that's a hell realm. I'm going to probably reference this particular show a lot of times. I know I've already referenced this one on Patreon, but I can't help it. Like, one of the best shows to watch on this, and like how this whole tree of life thing, and even like the Qliphothic tree of death, like you can find elements to this in the show Once Upon a Time, that ABC show Once Upon a Time. Like, they have a whole series where they or a whole season where they're in the underworld. And anyways, it's pretty wild, but there's a lot. And they have another season where they feature like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, and they connect that with childhood trauma and the shadow and the separation of the shadow through the repression of the shadow. And there's just a lot of alchemical principles in that show. There's also a lot of brainwashing too. So I'm not saying there isn't, but they really do go in with the alchemical principles. And they talk a lot about this concept of polarity integration as being a source of like strength and spiritual balance. And so they, the hero's journey, it's not just the hero's journey. There's also like a villain's journey too that you take as well, that we don't talk about as much. We talk about, like, when we talk about the hero's journey, we're always painted in the best light. But what if there are times when we are showing up as the villain in other people's realm? Like, shouldn't we highlight that too? Like, shouldn't we give that polarity its attention? So, this is just some stuff that has been coming up. Indigo type 3s are known to be polarity integrators, so this might just really be speaking to you. So make sure that you're also not inadvertently being caught up in the Qlippoth too. Energy is feeling really palpable and intense. And so I am, at least for a while, going to be going in a different direction with my content. And a lot of the like subliminals I share, it's going to be a lot on like the activation of the shadow body. I'm actually putting out some additional resources on my website soon related to this as well, and just some attunements and activations that I've put together. And I've been able to try out, and it's been really helpful and just world shifting in a lot of ways. It's just like a lot of things are starting to click, and a lot of it is around more of an embracing of all shadow aspects of myself and loving all aspects of myself to go back and fetch them too, because you could also just like forget about the shadow, right? Or try to anyways and just repress it. But, then you're more of like a fractured version of yourself if that happens. So, and this is a whole other download, which I'll share later, but I've been getting into studying a lot of the Qliphoth sciences. Okay. Yeah. The creator of the 12 tree Catharic grid and all of that, the writer of the Voyagers novels too. Like there's so much around the light body, and integrating the light body and all this kind of stuff. There's like so much of a focus on the light. And then there's like something around the shadow body or the pain body and like integrating it, but it's like kind of bypass. Like they focus so much on the light body. Took a pretty big deep dive with the Qliphoth sciences and just like reading the books, listening to the lectures, and knowing also that there was like a huge like cult dynamic that was happening with the content as well. And you can see the guru program and the expansion of it through the sharing of the content as well, which I find really interesting. And definitely, I would say something around controlled opposition as it relates to that particular movement. Even though there were some truths sprinkled in, there was also a lot of deception just around how the mechanics of our energetic field worked. A big piece of why there was like such a crashing and burning element to the Qliphoth sciences movement is because of the repression of the shadow. Had they integrated the shadow like in their workshops, or like also focused more on the shadow aspects, not just of the interdimensionals, they focus a lot on the shadows of people outside of them, but not as much on, what needs to be alchemized from within. And that is usually indicative of like a guru program as well. So had they focused more on cultivating the shadow wouldn't have come back so ferociously. There would have been some way of integrating it. And I think that's a big piece for folks who are like spiritual healers, spiritual teachers, is like letting go of that need to be perfect, or, which is like a really unrealistic expectation. But sometimes, especially with like social media and stuff, we're like kind of taught to portray like this like very certain life. And in a lot of ways, like I can only speak for my experience, I can definitely just say like, since I chose to be in my purpose and do that on purpose, like my life has changed dramatically for the better. And at the same time, there has been this like kind of this disconnect as well. Just with, when I woke up out of the false matrix simulation, I was somebody before then that was like super, like had lots of friends, was always hanging out with people. And a lot of that shifted. Like once I kind of came into my multidimensional self, I had less space for like a lot of the 3D relationships. And, that's just something that needed to happen for me to go through my own hero/villain journey, because it was both. Like I was like also the villain in people's stories too. And that's something I think we could talk more about, that there's a hero's journey and a villain's journey happening simultaneously. And that is going to be reflected within the architecture of the false matrix simulation. And you'll see elements of the tree of life, but also the tree of death playing out in your realm. And both are two sides of the same coin. And the idea is to transcend a lot of these programs. But you also have to know what programs you're in in order to retrieve your power. And I think that is where, I've had a big full circle moment with it. So I think a lot of my content has been around the light body and cultivating the light body and clearing the light body. But now, and I have focused on the shadow. I know I've integrated lots of shadow work prompts and affirmations, because we get into some pretty intense stuff that we're affirming. But yeah, I think it's time to go a little bit deeper with it. And so that's something that I'll be focusing in on with more of the offerings that I'm doing, especially around like Black Diamond healing coaching. I'm realizing that that's a big piece of getting people out of these like weird Qliphothic realms. And it's just been something I've naturally been attracting to me, but now I have a deeper understanding of it. Pretty fascinating. And it kind of feels like you kind of have this interesting sigh of relief when you realize it. It makes things feel more manageable. At least that's just me. And I'm actually really excited to help people with this in the times to come. So that's a big piece around Black Diamond healing and just like extreme shadow work, and not just cultivating your light body, but also cultivating your shadow body, and integrating the polarities of each. Like, this is the alchemical work. And this is what I'm really excited to be helping people do at this time, and doing it in my own life simultaneously. So I'm sending out lots of love, joy, and peace. And until we meet again, bye.